All right, so commercial interests petition FCC for high power allocation on shortwave spectrum. There's a lot of people that are talking about this. They're kind of freaking out about it in the effect of amateur radio. My initial feeling is that this is not that big a deal, right? And so part of it is that some of this stuff already exists. And what I mean by that specifically is these guys are trying to move data. Like they're trying to move big data over HF. Now, whether or not they're going to be successful, that's a moot point. They're asking for an FCC petition. Not that they can just, the FCC says, yeah, after they send this PDF, oh yeah, go ahead, take all the bands you want, go ahead. That's not what this is. This is like a, will you hear us out on what our request is? Here is our request. It's this PDF. And then they have to, the FCC goes off and says, yeah, you can do a study on this, and you know, we'll pick a location, you can do a study, and then people are able to discuss their issues with it, et cetera, right? So this is like step one, right, in the entire process. The reality is that we already have stuff like this. We already have co-ownership of bands where the military, for example, uses big data. When I say big data, I mean they're pushing big data on HF, and we don't have that much of a problem unless the stations are like right in our backyard. So in that case, yes, it's a fair issue, fair discussion point. So what do you guys say in the chat? Should we be worried about this?
Yeah, but Josh, what band are you talking about there?
So it's all HF, and if you pull up the PDF file for it, which I will do.
Yeah, I meant your example, right? Your example of sharing with the military currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for example, like one of the frequencies that I can remember off the top of my head is 14.9 megahertz. And then there's also one that's like pretty much just right on the edge of 12 meters. So they're very close. It's true. They're very close. So they dropped 100. There we go. There it is. All right. So they're potentially looking at 4.9 megahertz, 10.2 megahertz, 14.9, 19.9, and 24.8 megahertz, which 24.8 in particular is probably the most adjacent to an amateur radio band. I don't know. See, here's my thing, and I said this on the podcast. If you listen to it, Ham Radio Crash Course podcast. I as a ham, I'm going to have a, get off my lawn mentality, like immediately when anyone talks about like, we're going to put somebody with a lot of power right up against your band. Yeah, get off my lawn. I don't want you anywhere near my properties. The reality is that like the electromagnetic spectrum is finite, right? We already know this. Like we're going to have the ability to have these discussions. I'm not saying I'm supporting this. I'm just saying that we have to have the mechanism in which we can have these discussions, in which people can propose something, and then we can go through the process of like accrediting whether or not it's going to affect the adjacent neighbors. We have to have this capability, and that's what this is, I think. So I expect that the ARRL is likely going to drop their feelings of this as we get closer to the required date for feedback. And I encourage you all to read this document and provide your own feedback. I really, really do. At the same time, I don't feel like the fact that anyone is asking to use the space is an immediate the sky is falling situation. I think we all have to be a little bit more careful in the words we choose when we talk about this kind of stuff. Yes, we should be skeptical of everybody that wants to line up on our bands or anywhere on the bands, to be honest. But at the same time, we have to say, hey, we need to figure out a rubric in which we take your information and compare it to this rubric and come out with, is this good information, or is this a good study you've done, or is it a bad study? And sometimes that study will have to go to physical equipment being on the ground that we test, because you all know how ham radio works, right? We can't be precise in a lot of things in how we're getting out and who we're affecting. And we have to have test equipment on the devices that are under test to be able to say whether or not we know for sure how badly you're affecting other people, right? So we can't pick and choose how we deal with this, right? Like we all have to let them provide a test body that is tested, right? It gets deployed. They can use it. We take information. We can validate whether they are effective or not, and then that's how we would adjudicate whether this is safe or not safe in close proximity to our bands. Anybody disagree with that?
I think you nailed it spot on. We need to let them do what they need to, but make sure they don't take over everything either.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they can't we can't allow them to have harmonics that would come into our band space. But if they're in their band space and we're in ours, and they're not asking for band space in our band space, which this doesn't appear they are,
Right.
then
Because we don't have a leg to stand
I
on in
don't.
that space.
Yeah,
We can't say like, oh, you're too close to our band. Like we have no leg to stand on. We have a
right.
frequency allocation. And if someone's like butted up right next to us and they are good stewards of that frequency space and they don't bleed over, well, we have no right to complain. But once they start bleeding over, then absolutely we do. And given enough time, a lot of stations do that. But guess what? That's not a factor of what the FCC cares about. They want to hear that you have a plan to deal with that stuff, like a mitigation plan when it comes up, and they'll have to have all that.
And where were we
Right.
when the 40-meter band, or our allocation in the 40-meter band, is filled up with 1,000 kilowatt or more shortwave stations, because Europe doesn't follow the same standard we do.
So that's a great point. Great point. So at least in the sense that they came forward and provided a proposal in which we can look at what they're proposing and potentially even have a study situation, they're on board to at least work through the system. But yeah, like we have the IARU, but then we've got these international shortwave stations that blow up 40 meters. Like go on 40 meters right now, and you can't use the top end of that band. There's shortwave stations that have like kicked you out of there. You can't go there. Like they're dead to you right now.
Josh, is this because they're preparing for a world where satellites could no longer be useful?
No. So actually, that's a really good question. So what they're boy, ha. All right, go listen to the podcast. By the way, we actually found the guy who's kind of like the brain dude behind a lot of this stuff. If you think about how information gets moved from place to place, particularly across continents, so think stock exchange information and trades from America to the UK, for instance, and Germany and wherever. We've got like a couple of options. A lot of people everyone mainly is using fiber, right? Fiber has a certain speed that it's capable of. There are microwave interconnects that will do basically the speed of light with some data processing and all that. But if you think about HF over the continental divide is faster than fiber optic internet. So stock traders are looking at gleaming milliseconds off of the fastest trade information that they can do by going over RF because it's faster. So they're trying to profit off of the speed, if you will, of some, I'm assuming, high priority trades because the bandwidth is relatively small on HF that they potentially would be working with, but who knows what their end request is going to be. That's the gamble here, is that by going over HF, they could go faster technically in some cases than over fiber for trade information.
Here's my concern. My concern is we already know that commercial interests don't give a rip about respecting the ham space. We know this because they already took away the 3.8 gigahertz, which I get most people weren't using, but they were actually going to interlink hospitals here in Kansas City over 3.8. There was a network that they were going to do that, and that killed that. So I just worry about the precedent, and I worry about the fact that eventually they might want to start taking part of our space, in the HF bands.
I think that they're making a proposal to find out. So that's also part of this, is that they don't really know because they're not approved to be able to do it until they're allowed at least a study period, right?
And I think despite the fact that there are some shortwave stations, there's nowhere near the number of shortwave stations that existed when I was, when I started like in, 30 some odd years ago in running HF. Because at that time, 40 meters at night was unusable because of all the high-powered shortwave stations. Most of those are gone because they can't make money. So, in my opinion, there's plenty of bandwidth out there in HF where those commercial stations used to be. So I think there's personally, I think there's a lot of empty space in HF that could be given to them without we'll never see them.
And
I
that's kind
really
of what
don't think we are.
that's kind of what they were saying, is that this is empty space that's not really being used. And KI4WCO says, look at page 42, transmitter power, bandwidth, and emissions. This is a quote. We assume a 20 kilowatt transmit power on a transmitter bandwidth of 10 kilowatt or kilohertz as representative of long distance. I mean, again, like this is study terms, right? This is paperwork that they've done. This is not actuals, right? They're asking to like, hey, can we try this out? Can we pay you, the FCC, a lot of money to try this out? And hams, we provide no money, really, up until recently. They didn't even get $35 from us until a year ago. We've got no money. So when Daddy Warbuck shows up and says, I got a boatload of money here to try this, the FCC is going to go, oh, yeah, go ahead, try it. Why would they say no to that? Free money? Yeah, absolutely. For some randos to go off and try something? That's where our due diligence shows up, that we need to be ready to do studies and checks and make sure we're not interfered by a 21 kilowatt transmit power transmitter with a 10 kilohertz bandwidth, right? That absolutely, we need to be considerate of that. But I mean, can we really be shocked when the FCC goes, "Oh yeah, I'll totally cash your check"? No, like, come on.
Rhea said though that they had been offered experimental licenses to try this out, and they refused. That they want to get the allocation so they can actually do it. Or that was kind of the impression I got from what she was saying.
Well, I don't know how they plan to bypass everything by just a study on a PDF. That just doesn't work. I don't know how that's going to happen.
I don't know either, but she said she had some insider knowledge or something about that.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe, but at the end of the day, there's a period of responses, and I do encourage everybody to go to the ARRL website and pull this up and read it to the best of your ability. I'll actually say, if we scroll to the bottom here, they brought some interesting, like, look at these. These are actually pretty cool. So this is they were doing a study on like relative noise, right? So signal below noise for 60% of the population on 14.9 megahertz. And you can see as you get, there's these bands of noise, if you will. Pretty interesting. This is actually a really cool PDF to look at. Whether or not you agree, I think it's actually kind of cool that they tabulated some of this information. Whether the information is accurate or not, I'm not claiming either. But yeah, I think it was. I don't know. I don't know how to respond to all this, because at the end of the day, like, we have other users that are close to us. We have other users that are moving big data. Mm-hmm. We have other people that like are not hams that are either in our bands, some of which we share, or are very specific portions that they're just doing their thing on. Now, for you that live next door to where they put this station up, okay, that's a different discussion. And they have to do some due diligence in preventing you from being affected by them. They have to have appropriate filtering and all that, right? So all of that still has to be done. So yeah, I'll drop the link in the video here so you guys can all follow this. But yeah, it's interesting.
I was just curious, what do you guys think the practical nature of this is? I mean, we're all hams. We know how finicky propagation can be. Mm-hmm. What, and if we're talking about financial data, right, that has to be consistent, has to work every single time, every single day, right? How are they going to achieve that?
This is a shot in the dark, but so if they had a tier, if you will, like Uber premium tier, or people could pay extra dollars to have like high speed, super high speed, almost light, speed of light speed trades, like they could sell it that way. So it would be a premium option for doing a trade. That's just me, marketing brain turning on right now. That they could say like, oh yeah, if you give us, some X amount of lots of dollars, we will do all of this trade over our super high speed whatever frequency space. Now, if they're given a commercial license to be able to use this, those bands, those frequencies, they could basically do like ALE, right? They could figure out whatever the highest point is, like the best propagation point for any of those bands is, pick that one and go, we're pushing through this one. And that's how they do it.
Yeah, to me, I think this could have a positive effect, especially if you put them in a urban neighborhood like ours. They wouldn't be able to hear a damn thing. And that to me is a bigger problem right now with HF radio than anything else, because I'm literally being forced to move to get away from the freaking noise and to get away from or if these guys can come in and go, hey, FCC, this solar crap is interfering with us. They're going to have to build them better and more quiet. I think that benefits us. And so that to me would be a big boon if they get the same kind of interference that we do, because it's getting worse and worse every year.
Oh, that's actually an interesting point. I didn't really think about that, Don, but what if Daddy Warbucks with their tiny frequency space, and yes, it's tiny over the entirety of the bands, right, steps in and goes like, well, I was promised a much lower noise floor, so I can't reach Germany with my long-distance HF communication. I need the FCC to crack down. I mean, we already know the cat's out of the bag. There's too many shitty LG appliances and everything else that exists out there in the market right now. But that's actually an interesting point, Don. I agree.
Yeah, I'm just reading through the IEEE article that I was referencing before. Yeah, the company that's actually making this application, they've been doing this for 6 years, at least 6 years. So, they proved that it works. That's why they're making the application.
So hit us with it. So they proved that it works in what sense?
It's faster than the fiber cable. So they're looking at Chicago to New York between two major stock indices, and they want to chop about 8 milliseconds off their fiber time, and they're succeeding, which money talks, right? So that's why they're finally going ahead with a formal application to do this on a big scale and permanently, not just experimentally.
I mean, I don't know if you looked into this, but are they interfering with their neighbors at all, or how have they been working? Because it's like 6 years, so how's that work?
Yeah, well, the application might actually be from a competitor. So I don't think the company that's been doing this for 6 years is actually the one that's applying. It looks like a competitor has found out that this is the way of the future.
Right.
And they're getting in, getting their frequency allocated before the auction, goes up, and they lose a chance to get in on it. So.
Got it. Okay, guess what, guys? High data for stock trades already exists right now. It's already happening, and has been happening for 6 years. Is anyone affected by it? But see, this also goes back to my point of, like, if it's data and we don't know, we just know that our noise floor is higher. So how do we tell? It's kind of difficult, too.
It's the real commercial use of FT8. I just want to let you
That's what it is. It's a commercial FT8. Speaking of FT8.
I mean, there's always a chance that something else comes along that they'd rather have in the near future, and that they just move on.
Yeah, you know
before
what?
It gets crazy and they take all the whatever.
Do you know what, though? Think about it. Look at all the channels that are sitting there on FT8 right now. Mm-hmm. What if you were to simultaneously coordinate some data in each one of those channels, and then on the far side pick it up? How much data could you transmit?
Not a lot. It's not very big bandwidth.
For a stock trade, I don't think you have to, right? It's sell 1,000 shares of DuPont. And DuPont is DPT. So it's not a lot of data they're sending.
Oh, if they like split it across multiple channels kind of thing? Yeah, right. I could see that.
Yeah, because I mean, each one of us is having a communication with somebody else on FT8. That's what all this stuff is. And if you had all of that bandwidth to yourself to channelize it like that, that's what we do in the cell industry. We go in and we take a certain number of or a certain frequency range, and then we channelize the crap out of it. We have very sensitive radios on either side, and when that radio signal comes in, we then dechannelize it.
I think that overlanding for fun has the ultimate answer. Is I still say we allocate 7.200 to them and don't look back.
Oh yeah,
I think you got it. I think you actually solved everyone's problems.
Mm-hmm.
No, it would not solve because they're not going away. They're just going to move to another frequency that you care about. That's what's going to happen.
If they really want low latency, they need to do quantum entanglement.
I mean,
Now, come on. We know that alien tech stuff that the Pentagon knows about is not for stock
well,
trading.
come on. We're not doing this. We're not going down this road.
Oh, I love it.
Well, so I think the answer, well, there's so many answers to this. So Jim made a video that was very vague. I will say Jim made a video that was very vague, and he did, I think, justifiably say, "Hey, I don't know about it. I don't know enough about this. What do you all think about it?" So that's true. But then we started getting posts on it on the Facebook group, and it started making the rounds everywhere because, you know, when Jim makes a video that kind of hits the zeitgeist, it gets shared. The reality is that it's already happening. Some of this stuff is already there, either in the form of our military that shares spaces with us, or as Jody pointed out, stock traders that are already doing a lot of this stuff. It's already in place. So going back to what I said earlier, we have to be stewards of our bands, but also we can't really be upset if somebody sets up shop next to us. We just have to make sure that they also are being good stewards of their frequency space, which is the important point. I will hold off my final thoughts. I have some information that we stumbled upon during the podcast. I may make a video about it. I'm not sure yet, but I'm also waiting to hear what the ARRL says. I want to hear what they have to say, and I'm looking forward to reading their comments on it. So until that, it's like I don't really know that we all start breaking out the pitchforks to poke a hole through their coax yet, but, you know, it's always an option, right?